Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green here. Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For all of us who have been in practice for a little while, you've probably struggled with fear of rejection at some point in your business journey. And to discuss that and how going for no ultimately gets us to yes, I'm joined by world-class author Andrea Waltz, who is the author of the wonderful book, Go for No. Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Jesse, it is so good to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to be here talking because this is a common problem that we hear about, this fear of rejection. And it comes up in lots of elements of life. And I suppose in business, it's often in a leadership context, in a sales or case presentation context, but just in general life, it comes up and can hold people back in lots of different ways. And I wanted to begin our conversation by talking about the word no, and specifically our relationship with the word no. So I wondered if we could just start there and get a bit of background as to why that word can trigger us so greatly in so many different ways.
Well, I like that you started with using the phrase, the relationship with the word no, because we do have a relationship with the word no. We don't think that we do, but we do. And from a scientific, biological standpoint, we are hardwired, built into our DNA to avoid rejection, to not want to get thrown out of the tribe, as it were, and have people in our community reject us, say no to us. We see that as very dangerous. The brain sees that as not a good thing. And so as a result, here we are in the 21st century, and our brains are still back in the in thousands and thousands of years ago because they haven't caught up. So as a result, what tends to happen is that when we're doing something as simple as maybe presenting a treatment plan or reaching out to follow up with a customer or whatever it happens to be, maybe you're just at a networking event, it feels very scary and our brains are very cautious. And so the whole idea behind the Go for No philosophy and the book that we wrote and program that we created and everything is to change that relationship with the word no so that it's no longer scary, that it's no longer seen as an obstacle, but really that you can see it as an asset. Because we have to get good at handling rejection, the fear of rejection, because without getting good at it, we tend to shy away from opportunities, putting ourselves in a situation where we might hear the word no. And so as a result, business suffers, personal relationships suffer. I mean, everything in business and life suffers from that.
It's a really good point because, as you say, it is not just a business relationship that we have with the word no. It's a personal relationship in lots of different ways, whether it's trying to date someone or meet someone special in your life, all the way through to the business context we'll probably discuss more today. But I wanted to talk a bit about the initial change of that relationship with the word no. When I was a young business guy growing up, I had the opportunity to do cold calls and door-to-door selling and all that sort of stuff. And you certainly develop a thicker skin, but I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, to be honest with you, because it was pretty brutal plunging into the deep end. So I guess not everyone's going to want to go and do the things that I did around that, and I certainly don't necessarily suggest it either. So how does one begin to change the relationship with the word no without taking an all or nothing, bugger it, let's just go for it routine? How do we do that?
Well, in order to answer that question, let me set the stage for how even the philosophy of Go for No came about. And this is a phrase that, let me put it this way. As sales trainers and speakers, my husband and business partner and I, Richard Fenton, we wrote the book together. We recognize that we're not the first people to ever talk about the word no. Obviously, the word no has been a thing in sales forever. We're probably one of the first to package it in such a way as kind of developing the brand and this phrase, go for no. And I think a lot of people might hear that and think, well, go for no, that's silly. Why? I don't want to go for no. I want to go for yes, right? Everything in life, of course, we all want success and we all want the yeses in whatever we're pursuing. And so I want to illustrate this to get to your question with a story. And it's how this all came about. And it happened to Richard when he was fairly young, kind of like you with cold calling. He was in the sales world, but it wasn't cold calling. He was actually working in retail and he was selling suits for a living. And a customer came in one day, and he was actually not at the time, he was a good salesperson, but he was still struggling. He was still failing. And this customer came into the store. And keep in mind, this is like a traditional menswear store, and this goes back quite a while ago. And the customer basically announces he wants to buy an entire wardrobe of clothing. And so Richard gets to take care of this man. He sells him a suit and a sport coat and shirts, slacks, belt, pocket square. He has this great sale. And it comes to $1,100. Of course, this is in the US. And this would be like probably the equivalent of maybe selling $5,000 today. So this is a big sale. And after he finished, he's thinking that his district manager, who was there that day watching this whole interaction, he's thinking that Richard's thinking he's going to get congratulated.
Yep.
But instead, his district manager comes to him and says, Richard, out of curiosity, what did that customer say no to? Now, Richard has to think about this sale, and he reviews it in his mind, and he pictures laying all these items out in front of this customer, and he says, that customer didn't say no to anything. Everything I laid in front of him, he said yes to. And then his district manager said, well, then how did you know he was done? And the reason that Richard knew he was done, the customer was done in this case, wasn't because the customer said, hey, I'm done, I don't want to buy anymore. It was because he was the one who ended the sale. He was the one who shut the sale down. He never heard the word no. And Richard's district manager gave him this really powerful little bit of advice. He said, I watched your interaction. I watched you sell, and you're a good salesperson. But your fear of the word no is going to kill you. If you could just learn to get over that, I think you could be one of the great ones. And when Richard tells this story, because we speak together on stage
all the time,
all over, sales conferences and things like that. And he usually tells this story. And when he tells the story, he says, I didn't know if I had what it took to succeed, but I knew I had what it took to fail. Now, that sounds crazy. He said, I could fail my way to success. I could be willing to hear no more often. And in that process of hearing no more often, I will get more yeses. So it's like, Jesse, anything in life, I guess you could say a little bit of a numbers game.
Yep.
But the reality is, right, the more customers we talk to, the more patients, clients that we see, and things that we show them, things that we offer them, the more opportunities we have for those yeses to come. So to kind of go back to your question of how do we look at Go for No and how do we start, the most important thing is you've got to be willing to hear no. And what that means is you've got to be willing to ask.
Yeah.
You've got to be willing to ask more questions and to make more offers. And when you do that, yes, of course, by extension, you're going to hear no more often. People are going to say, I don't want that. I don't want that. But you'll also get more yeses.
I just want to linger on that for a moment, Andrea, because I think one of the things that dentists feel, and certainly I have too, so I don't want to hold my hand up and pretend that I'm immune from all of this, is sometimes a no feels like a personal rejection, like it's a rejection of me rather than the rejection of the treatment plan or whatever it is that I'm offering. How do you differentiate between that level of personal rejection versus rejection of the product, the treatment, the whatever else?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think as professionals, there is a certain amount of personalization. It's not as bad as being an actor or actress.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, actors have to go out and they get tons and tons of rejections for roles. You hear about how an actor will go out just to get one role, they'll get hundreds of no's. And so they learn to literally numb themselves to know that they have to understand. But I think when it comes to service professionals, I think there is still, even though they're not rejecting your work per se, there's still an amount of personalization to it. I remember when Richard and I met and he told me the Go for No story I just told you, we both worked at Lens Crafters, the big eyeglass retailer. I was general manager of the store, so I ran the entire store, but I still would help customers every now and then. And I shied away sometimes from recommending things, mostly because in my head, I was the professional and I knew what they needed oftentimes they didn't, right? The customer doesn't know what they don't know. I knew what they needed best. But often what I found myself doing was making assumptions about what they would decide and what they would spend based on my knowledge and my history. I'd worked there for so long, and you start to kind of have a feel for, like, you get a feel for somebody. This person is just not going to spend. And so what I would do was I would not offer certain things because in my head, I would say to myself, they're just going to tell me no. And I used to think that was me being efficient. And what I realized, that was me protecting myself from the no. So to your point about taking it personally, we do. And I think the reason is just because of that biological wiring, there's a little bit of pain there, a little bit of psychological pain, a little bit of emotional pain. So as professionals, if we see that I could share with this person all of these different options, and I could share with them the luxury treatment plan where they get everything, but they're probably going to say no to it. So let's just focus on the must-dos, right? Let's get the easy yes, and we won't share the other things. And that is that psychological protection. So how do we work through that? And there are a few things that you can do to mitigate that. One is work on, obviously, just going for no, really making those asks anyway. And there are also some things that you can do and say with patients so that it doesn't feel like you're being that pushy, aggressive salesperson, because I know, especially for service providers, for healthcare practitioners, they don't want to feel like they're selling, but to a fault. And I'm sure you've seen this. They work so hard to not sell that they swing the pendulum all the way over to where it's like, we don't want to look like we're selling at all. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You can't swing the pendulum so far that you're now doing a disservice.
Yeah, 100%. I'm reminded, actually, Andrew, when I was a young dentist and I'd first gone into private practice, there was a fellow that came in through the door, and let's just say he wasn't dressed very nicely. He had torn jeans. He was wearing some shoes with holes in them, and he didn't present as a professional looking fellow. And I knew what he needed. He needed he needed a full mouth rehab, as we say in dentistry. And I offered him back then an amalgam restoration because we used amalgam back in those days. And he took the amalgam restorations, and when he went to pay for it, he pulled out a platinum Amex card at the time, which back then was a thing. And I remember getting a really big lesson in assumptions, and I realized I'd made an assumption about his ability to pay, his ability to be interested in dentistry based on his appearance. And it was a sobering experience for me, and it's one I remember and still talk about. And I think now, candidly, what a disservice I did by not even offering him the treatment. He may have said no, but he didn't get the opportunity to say no. I robbed him of that chance. So you have a very well-known phrase. Your book is incredibly well-known. It's recommended on all the must-read lists. Anyone I know Salesforce has recommended it, Pipedrive has recommended it, and many other great places have recommended it. But you have a phrase that I really like, and I wanted to actually just dive into that and see if we can unpack it, and that is, yes is the destination and no is how you get there. And I wondered if we could talk a bit about that, because I think as we get through this, we want to actually, yes, get to the sale. We want to get to that acceptance of the treatment plan or whatever it is we're proposing. So can we just talk about that phrase and why you coined that phrase and how it lives in practice?
Yes, and thank goodness we did come up with that phrase, because again, as I was saying, go for no does strike people oftentimes as negative because no is such a charged word, and nobody wants to hear it in sales or business at all. And we totally get that. And so we've got a model in the book, which is a really simplified model, but it's kind of a neat way of looking at what this all comes down to. And this goes for business and life. And when you look at how we've all been taught and trained as a society, and Jesse, this goes, by the way, for almost every country on this planet. I have heard from people all throughout Asia, Africa, Europe, certainly Australia, New Zealand, Canada, you name it. I have heard from people who have written me saying, I need Go for No. It's helped me with my mindset. So this is a human thing. We've all been taught and trained that we're kind of in the middle of this process. Yes, success, everything that we want is on one side. Failure, rejection, hearing the word no is on the other side of us. We're in the middle, right?
Yep.
And we want to do everything within our power to move away from the no's and away from the failure and towards the success. But really, we need to be operating with a newer model, which is where we're really on the end of this process. The failure, the rejection, the hearing the word no is in the middle.
Yep.
And the yeses and the success are on the opposite side. So if you can picture, you've got to move through those no's. And that's why yes is the destination, no is how you get there is so important to this mindset, is because we want to make it clear that yes is what we want. You're not going for no just to hear no. And sometimes people hear that and they think, oh, so these guys just want me to hear no over and over again? That's crazy. Of course we don't. Yes is absolutely what we want, but the no is the way, and the no is in the middle. It's in between the yes. And if you want more of one, you're going to have to get more of the other. So if you want more yeses, you're going to have to get more no's. If you shy away from hearing no, if you avoid it, if you aren't talking and educating patients and aren't asking them and saying, and one of my favorite phrases is, hey, we want to tell you about this, even if it's not for now. This is something that you need to consider for the future, right? And if you're not educating patients and you're not giving them the options and making those asks, is this something that you'd like to explore now? Then you will limit your yeses.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like that classic phrase of make more offers. It sounds like a mother of skill is repetition, right? And it sounds a bit like doing those reps over and again. And the first handful, or maybe the first quite few, might be a bit awkward and a bit clunky, and maybe you'll get a bit more no's than you might. But I guess as you do more and more of this, you're going to become more skillful. You'll be able to develop your own patter as you approach the offer, as you approach the questions that come back from the offer, sometimes called objections. I prefer them to be questions. But you'll develop the skills around it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how many reps is enough. I mean, I know that's an open-ended question. It's like, how long is a piece of string? The more, the better, and you never kind of master it. I get that. But just so someone who might be starting out now, who's brand new in this field, how many times, if it's possible, to figure out how many offers would they need to make before they start to feel a little more comfortable, before they start to go, okay, I get this. I've just got to get through the no's. I'll get to the yeses. What's that look like?
It's really neat that you asked this question too, because I was just talking to somebody about this on a commercial real estate podcast. And he was giving me an example of how they do so much cold calling in commercial real estate. And he said, though, once that person, they may have to make 100 calls, but once they finally get their first yes and they get that first success, it's like they're hooked. Yeah. They kind of realize, oh, I get it. And so I would answer that question not by necessarily a number, because as you said, it's hard to put that number.
Yeah.
But I think once you can tie that result to that behavior of making those asks, and you have that surprise of, oh, this person actually said yes to the plan. I never thought they would. I figured I would just get a no. Once they realize that they make that connection to making the ask and making the offer, then they get so much better. They get so much looser. Jack Canfield, who wrote the Success Principles, such an amazing guy. I got to interview him several years ago for a Go for No documentary movie that we did. And we somehow got on we were talking about Go for No. And he defined confidence, self-confidence this way. He said, self-confidence is the successfully survived risk, which I loved. And so when you think about people who are making those offers, and it's how many times does it take? And I think a lot of it is just building up the self-confidence. And so it's successfully surviving all of those little mini risks, right? Our brain perceives them as mini risks. So if we can do it 10, 20, 30 times, I think that's a good chunk where we survive those and we go like, okay, it's not a big deal. And then once we get that yes, that one time, it's like, okay, now I'm really excited. Now I can see the connection.
Yeah, nice big dopamine hit. I wanted to ask you a bit about the energy required when you're having these conversations as well, because again, one of the things I've noticed in my own case presentations and so on is the more, not, I want to use the word energetic, but not so energetic that I'm hyperactive and off the scale, but also not so low energy that I could be talking to a corpse. I wanted to ask you about not just what you say, but how you say it, how you deliver that presentation, how you deliver the ask, and its importance or lack of importance in the result.
That is such a good question, Jesse, because I don't get asked this very often. And this is the type of, Richard loves this topic because he always cautions people that sometimes passion, overly passion, can look like desperation.
Yes.
Or come across as pushiness. And from a go for no standpoint, our posture, in other words, kind of how, to your point, how we come across in tone and everything, it matters. It matters quite a good deal. In fact, funny too, I did a survey. I did two. I did one on Twitter, or X as they call it, and I did one in my Facebook group. And I asked people, which do you think is more important? How you say something, in other words, the tone and how you come across, or the words that you say. And I thought for sure that everybody was going to pick the words you say. And in both cases, the tone was probably like 3-1. It was like people were like, the tone and how you come across is so important. So obviously, I think that if people are feeling that way as salespeople, then they probably also feel that way as customers and clients and patients. And that's really important to them. So the takeaway that I've kind of come away from this with us being these people that say, hey, don't overdo the passion, kind of come across with a more detached posture is also have a go for yes energy.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is be positive. You don't have to come at go for no. If you're going for no, meaning you're making the offers, with a mindset of, well, they're going to say no, or this isn't going to go well. Be positive, have some energy, have some excitement for what's possible for your patient, because this is life-changing stuff for them. And often, unfortunately, people don't realize like how important some of these things are until they get it done. And then they say things like, and I know everybody listening to this has probably heard this, thank goodness I did this. Thank you for recommending this. Thank you for suggesting this. This needed to be done. And they're so much happier. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, Jesse. I think the tone is positive without being over passionate.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really interesting, Andrea. I was talking to some friends of mine yesterday who run some AI services, and they've developed a product which allows you to scan a patient's records, check the photographs, check the x-rays, check the patient notes, and examine what work is appropriate for that particular patient. And what's really interesting is the amount of underdiagnosis by dentists is phenomenal. So he presented me some figures. The gap between the treatment required, the treatment presented, is massive. The gap between presented treatment and treatment accepted is considerably less. And so what I'm picking up out of that is people are not offering, people are not even suggesting this treatment to the patient. So the patients don't even have the opportunity to say no in the first instance. So I really appreciate the fact that we've got to get out there, do more, make more offers, get through the no's to get to the yeses. I wanted to ask you another question around this, because you said you had a background as a general manager in a store, and I think that speaks to some of the roles that our practice owners would be relating to in this instance. And I wanted to ask you about training other people to sell, because in dentistry, one of the things that we typically see is the principal of the practice, for lack of a better description, sells way more effectively than the other clinicians. Now, that's not always the case, but as a generalization, it holds true. And so what that means is you see disproportionately the principal generating revenue where the associate dentists are relatively less. So I wanted to talk about how you can build a team around this. How do you teach this as a team? How do you level your team members up?
It's such a good question. So real quick, the 5 failure levels, which is in Go for No. Level one is the ability to fail. And I
Yeah.
know people freak out about the word failure. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
insert the word no, the ability to hear the word no. Level two is the willingness. So you listen to a show like this and you say like, oh, okay, interesting. Maybe we'll try this in our office. Level three is the wantingness. If your
Mm.
head hits the pillow at night and you did not hear the word no one time that day, you did not sell to your full potential. Level four is failing bigger and faster. That means going after big no's. That means offering those platinum plans, those everything that's possible.
Yep.
And level five is, to your point, it's failing exponentially, which means getting the whole team on board. So I
Mm.
think from a culture standpoint, in fact, I just had a guy who is in a healthcare company on LinkedIn. He posted a really neat post about how they're integrating Go for No into their advanced sales training in their healthcare company. Everybody's going to read it. So I think from a culture standpoint is educating everyone on not that, hey, they need to hear the word no, but if you want to spin it another way, is you need to ask and you
Mm.
need to be okay, not where you're expecting to hear a no. Again, have that positive mindset, have that yes energy, but where you accept it and getting that and getting your office staff to accept hearing no and reinforcing that it's not a bad thing. I think that this would be my number one piece of advice for the managers and the leaders in offices is you sit everyone down, you talk through the Go for No philosophy, you explain what it is, and you say, effective now, if I see you presenting a treatment plan to someone, and now this could be an associate dentist or even the staff, right? If I see you suggesting anything and the patient says no, this is not where you should feel ashamed or bad or embarrassed. In fact, we're going to celebrate you. And this can radically change how people function in the office to where they don't feel like they've done something wrong. Because I
Mm.
think traditionally, salespeople see that no as a failure. And
Yes.
so what we've got to do is managers have to not necessarily incentivize monetarily, but at least reward people or give people a pat on the back to say, hey, what's important is that you educated the patient. That is number one. That is the number one goal. And to give them their options and then make that ask. Is this something that they would like to move forward with today? Get it on the schedule, right? Make the appointment. And so reward that behavior. And if they get a no, reward that no too.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many things I could dive into there as well because it's got so many applications. I think when you do get the no, I guess the opportunity is then what, right? Now what happens after the no? And you're quite right. Is there something else they might want to buy? Could we downsell into something that's a little more moderate for today and keep the big thing for later? I wanted to talk a little bit about follow up and what happens post no. What do we do with those no's, whether it's an absolute no or not yet, or I'll take the smaller version of that. So I wondered if we could just talk about dealing with the no's and what to do with no's.
Jesse, you're literally asking all my favorite questions on this
Okay, great.
podcast. Okay, this is so good. Now, funnily enough, 2 years ago, Richard and I wrote a book called When They Say No. We wrote
Mm,
Go for No 2 decades ago. Finally, we wrote a book called When They Say No because of this exact question. What do you do when here we are talking about get the no. Okay, so when you get the no now, what are you
yeah.
supposed to do with it, right? It's such a great question. Number one, your response. Whatever you do, you respond positively,
Yep.
right? This is not a failure. This is not something you should be ashamed about. This is nothing that you should make the patient feel awkward about. You want to just be positive and you want to say, if they say, oh, no, not something I'm interested in, the response is great. I'm glad that we educated you on this today. Perhaps this would be something that you can do in the future. So, what should we do from here, right? And that's the next question. You just ask that right back to the patient. So is it, do we just keep the current appointment? Do we downsize? You just come up with, based on the situation, right? Because
Yep.
this is an art, not a science. It's,
Yes.
you just come up with that next question of what we can do, where we go here, what is the next step? If they didn't want that, what's the next step, and fit them into whatever that most logical next step is. But I think more than anything, Jesse, it's the mindset of when you ask and you get that no, it's just be positive.
Yes.
Just respond positively, move very quickly on to what's the next thing. I think a lot of people worry that they'll be awkward and discombobulated with, well, what do I do now? And
Yeah.
now I feel bad. And now it's like, well, will they do business with us at all? Will they just storm out of the office? People have these nightmare scenarios. And so it's just we be positive and we move on to the next thing.
And I think that's really important because that fear is real of will they ever do business with us if they've said no to this? And I think the answer to that question is what you just articulated, how you respond. If you respond positively, as you suggest, then chances are that relationship is maintained and everything's fine. They're saying no to the treatment, not to you. But I guess if you have an emotional reaction to that where you get bent out of shape or your face gives away a look of annoyance or frustration or whatever it is, I think that's when the patient may start to think a little more about, am I saying no to the treatment or to the practitioner or to the practice? So I wanted to just kind of make that point because, ladies and gents, I've been guilty of getting bent out of shape in the past when someone said no to my beautifully crafted, thought-out treatment plan that was going to save their teeth and make their life amazing. But they didn't want it, and that's okay. And I felt a little bit, I suppose, disheartened at the time, and it probably showed on my face. And I lost one or two patients in that respect. And so I think to Andrea's point, if you can respond positively, that is, I think, the golden key. I think it is the key to the whole thing.
I love that you said that. And I think one of the things too, and we have this in the book, is no doesn't mean never, no means not yet.
Yeah.
And when we educate, I think what often happens, and probably a lot of people listening to this have had this happen, where you plant a seed. And we would do this at Lens Crafters. It's kind of like somebody gets a new prescription. It's like, all right, let's get you glasses for driving. Would you also like a pair of glasses for driving, but with tinted lenses? So there's basically prescription sunglasses. Most people would say no. They're paying a few $100s for the first pair. They don't want the second pair. And then you made the offer. And so now it's bugging them. And now they get in the car and they put their regular glasses on and it's bright and they think, wow, prescription sunglasses would be amazing. And so how many people will come back in and take advantage of that? Well, it's the same thing. How many people will think about that and ruminate over what that offer was? And then maybe it's the next year or the year after that, that they say, you know what, I do want to get this treatment. I am ready.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And certainly in dental practice, that happens all the time. You've been recommending the Crown for 10 years and all of a sudden they're ready. And whatever reason that is, I don't always know what the reason is or what shifted internally for them, but they're ready and that's great. Andrea, there's been so much ground that we've covered today and I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing so generously. I think the Go for No principles that you've outlined are really powerful, really important, and they'll dramatically change people's lives in the space of obviously sales, but in terms of personal relationships. We didn't really touch on that so much, but being brave and putting yourself out there, and equally in leadership situations where you may be suggesting ideas and maybe they get accepted or maybe not. So I want to just say thank you for talking about this fear of rejection, because it is something that's real. It's something that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis in lots of different elements of our life, and the work that you guys have done is remarkable. For those that want to explore more about your work, what's the best way to get in contact with you or to find resources to support themselves?
Yeah, well, we'd love people to just pop on over to goforno.com, and that's spelled just like you would imagine, GOFONO.com. We have a fun quiz on our website. It's easy and free, and this is a quiz. We've heard of IQ test. Well, this is your NQ test. This is an NQ quiz to measure your no quotient. So if you're curious about where you are and in terms of your mindset, you come take the quiz.
Thank you. I think that'd be great. So, ladies and gents, I think that'd be really good for your team to do as well. And it might give you some insights into how your different team members operate and their relationship with the word no. I think that'd be really useful. Andrea, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us. You've been a wonderful guest, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love? Well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.